One thing that I've done, since I started fishing, which hasn't been that long, I didn't start tournament fishing until 2009. But one of the first baits that I fell in love with was a frog. And I think it was the first time I'd ever won a tournament was throwing a frog bait. It was actually on a buzz frog, which I'm going to get in. I've passed those frogs and hooks and things around for you guys to see. That you guys could get a chance to look at it before I get to talking about it specifically. You guys can get an idea what I'm talking about. Just fell in love with that bait. I loved it because I caught big ones on the frog. I could go around and catch a crankbait and catch a limit, but I'd always go to the frog a lot of times to catch my kicker fish. And sometimes, there's times in Ohio, especially in the fall, where a frog's one of the few baits I can even get them to eat. A lot of people think frog fishing, there's got to be, fish are keying in on feeding on frogs. And really, that's not the case at all. A frog can mimic a lot of different things. A lot of times when the bluegills are on the beds, a frog is a very, very effective bait to throw to those bluegill beds. It imitates a shad. And like I was talking about in the fall, a lot of times topwater can be the deal. And when them fish get in really extremely shallow water around grass, around cover, a frog is an excellent bait. So don't think just because you're throwing a frog, it replicates a frog, or you're trying to make that bass think it's a frog. One of the biggest jokes that me and my brother have actually, we was talking to a guy out in Florida, and he's like, all these lakes down here, he's like, we don't have frogs in these strip pits, so the bass don't eat frogs. Just because they didn't think that the frogs lived there, they didn't think a bass would eat them, and that's not the case. And I don't think a lot of times when you're fishing a frog, you're mimicking a frog at all. Obviously, frogs are great to fish in heavy cover. A lot of people think just matted vegetation. That's why I put, but not limited to. I catch a lot of fish on a frog in open water. Not when I say open water, next to things, like beside a boat dock, over top of overhanging, or over top of laydowns, anywhere where I would flip and pitch a bait. I'm going to get back and I'm going to throw a frog to it if I think I can catch them on a frog. And a lot of times, even whenever I'm going around flipping and pitching, I'm going to make a cast up to a laydown or to a bush and try to lay it in there and try to catch that frog fish first before I go up there flipping. I might be able to catch two off that tree versus just flipping in there and just catching one. So there's a lot of different ways to fish them. One time Rick Clunn up on Oneida Lake, the grass got real chopped up as the tournament was going on. He was offshore fishing for smallmouth, and he couldn't throw a pawpaw anymore because the grass kept getting tangled around his hooks, so he actually resorted to a frog. Out in the middle of Lake Oneida, which there is no frogs out there, so he was basically just imitating a shad out in the middle of the lake, and the fish were still reacting to it too. So braided line on a frog, it isn't like, you kind of need to use braid, no. You have to use braided line when fishing frogs. There's no way around it. I've learned every bad way to fish a frog before I learned how to do it right. And the fish can't see it, it doesn't bother them. You just flat out can't get a hook in them is really what it comes down to. You can't get them out of the heavy cover without using braided line. The minimum I like to go on braided line is 50-pound test, spider wire, ultra cast. The reason why I pass that stuff around to you guys is I wanted you guys to see, for those of you that don't know what braid actually is, there's zero stretch. And what that stuff can do, it actually saws through grass because it doesn't stretch. It's almost like a weed eater cord. Like if you set the hook, a fish blows up in lily pads, and I set the hook, a lot of times you'll see lily pads just, if that fish swam across the lily pads before I set the hook, it'll just cut them. So you got direct contact with that fish all the time. If I'm fishing monofilament or fluorocarbon, well, fluorocarbon will sink on the topwater, so that's really not a good way to go. But if I was fishing those lines and a fish buries me up or is in the lily pads and swims a little bit and I go to pull on him, between the stretch in the rod, the stretch in the line, trying to bury a big hook and a big fish from a distance, between that and the shock absorption in the cover, you just won't hook them. Or once you do hook them, you're never going to get them out. So braid is a huge deal, and that no stretch allows you to, whenever I set the hook on a frog, it's violent stuff. I mean, we'll get into the hook set later, but you're cracking them. And you need that braid. It'll sound violent. It'll crack when you hit them, and you'll just bury the hooks in them. So I'll go in and just cut a few legs out on one side and a few legs out on the other. I mean, they make them with plenty of strands, plenty of material, a little bit too much, but that's good because you can just cut them out. So I'll just go right in and thin out 3 or 4 strands on each side just because I don't like them super heavy. I don't want all that drag. I mean, there's some guys that fish down in Guttersville, they just almost cut the legs right off of them. So you just basically have the body. And they walk really well like that too. But I just like a thinned out frog legs, one longer than the other. Shortened, thin, and one longer than the other. Another thing with the hooks on this, on the Spro frog, is, I don't know if you guys can see how flat those hooks are. Most of the time when a fish eats my frog, you guys can see that, the hooks are basically flat on top of the body. Logan, can you go back to that photo? I don't know if you guys can see here. This is very important. So you got the hooks here right on the top of the frog, and they're all made a little bit different. But what you want to make sure is if you're not fishing on extremely matted vegetation, you want to be able to almost run your finger across the top of the frog and snag your finger. If them hooks are parallel to the body and there's not much of an area there.
I hope you enjoyed the preview clip, and for more like that and the entire collection, subscribe to the Bass University TV. And if you want the tackle that you see on there, I want you to go to the Bass University Tackle Shop, powered by Tackle Warehouse, and click right here, and it's all at your fingertips.
Welcome to Bass University TV, an online video training course where you'll learn champion bass fishing techniques from pro anglers Pete Glusek, Mike Iaconelli, and their talented special guests. From on the water to in the classroom, you'll learn sound techniques and strong fundamental bass fishing skills. Watch hours of video content on multiple topics at your own pace for a low monthly fee. Cancel at any time. Information is power in the sport of fishing, so learn from the very best. Subscribe to Bass University TV today.